we were discussing like, should we ask Yumin to like change, or it's like too tedious for you?
I'm happy to do that. It's like a fashion show.
Hello everyone, welcome to Ragtag, the place for bites and banter. I'm Saloni, software engineer.
I'm Victoria, solutions engineer.
And today we have a guest speaker, Yumin. She is also a software engineer. And today we'll be talking about career tips and self-evaluation tips and how we can get promoted and learn a bit more from Yumin. So let's start with, I wanted to ask about one-on-ones. So let's start with that. In my team, we usually have one-on-ones with every team member, especially our team lead. So the team member one is voluntary. If you want, you can have them. It's optional as well. But the more important one, I guess, is the one with my team lead, where we will talk about our milestones, what we have reached, and there are some times where I actually do not have anything to add to our meeting, so we'll cancel it, or we'll just talk about how things are going. But would you have any tips on how you go about your one-on-ones, and any advice for people like us who are trying to grow up the ladder?
Yeah, sure. I think the one-on-ones, they're a very special relationship, and it depends on how you like to operate, how you like to receive feedback, how you like to give feedback, and how your engineering manager or your team lead is able to, kind of where you're able to align on those things. I start off especially when I have a new one-on-one relationship, I start off with a document, because I'm also a planner and I'm also a very visual person, and my memory is just not the best. So I like to come in with an agenda of maybe a subset of questions that I'd like to go through. And to start off, you can look for some templates online. They have really good questions for one-on-ones. And if you run out of things to say, you can always touch on those points. So I always leave them at the bottom, and I highlight the ones that I do want to talk about that's maybe pertinent to our project that we're working on, something that I experienced recently. And then the other, so-called backup questions I always have in my toolbox. And I usually, take some questions that I have with other one-on-ones and kind of wrote them in as well. They never have to know, that I found personally very helpful. In terms of, tips with getting those one-on-ones towards a direction, trending towards a promotion or trending towards career growth, it really does stem from the types of questions you ask, and also them understanding your motivation behind those questions. So I found it very helpful to at least highlight my motivation behind a question. For example, I am looking for a staff role in the future. I don't know how I can increase my impact. Or since you're the team lead, do you see any opportunities for me to step up into? Are you lacking any support in certain areas that I can probably help out with? Other things could be, talking about your strengths and talking about your limitations, or talking about your comfort zone. What are some things that you are very comfortable doing, you've done multiple times, and your team lead can trust you to do? Or can those also be seen as opportunities for other team members in your other one-on-ones? Are those opportunities that, hey, I've done this multiple times, I feel very comfortable, but I do think that it'll be great to kind of share that knowledge. Would you be interested in helping me with that? Can I help you maybe hand some things over? So in that way, you're giving more room for others to grow. Then you're removing yourself from always being that go-to person for this particular task. Then making space for yourself to take on something else. So it's like a very, you're kind of like moving the things over to someone else, but offering them an opportunity to learn, and then you're making space for you to take something else on. So, from the team-wide perspective, nothing's being dropped. You're just shifting responsibilities, right? That is also important for your team lead to know, hey, I was thinking maybe Brian might be interested in this opportunity. I've talked to them before. Since I'm handing that off to them, do you think I can look into something else and maybe get more experience in XYZ, right? So that's how I like to go about doing my one-on-ones, especially if I'm wrapping something up. And other things I would like to ask is you're a team lead, right? How did you get to that position? How was your journey in that? Because if you're interested in in going to that position, the best thing is to ask the person who's already in that position and, learn about their journeys getting there. So there's other kinds of questions I would ask too is about them. And people like talking about themselves. What other better way to establish, right, that relationship than to really show the interest, and you are genuinely interested in how they got there, and hearing from their perspective. Sometimes, yeah, I think, I haven't really canceled one-on-ones unless I'm going out on vacation or my manager or somebody else is also going on vacation. Of course, we can reschedule, but I do like to keep them as much as I can, because I feel like when you go too long without a one-on-one, it feels like, oh, that relationship that you worked so hard to establish is now like going back, like you're diverging again. Of course, it also depends on like what you want out of that one-on-one. Yeah, I think a lot of the questions you ask really depend on what you want out of the one-on-one.
I see. Yeah. Like even in like when I have my one-on-one, it usually starts off with like, oh, how are you doing? And I realize it's a one-on-one. I would also make sure that I also ask him or her back, like,
Yeah.
how are you? Like,
Yeah.
like yeah, I understand you would like to ask me, but then I also want to learn about you.
Right. It's
How
a
are you
two-way
doing?
thing. Yeah,
As well.
exactly.
It's not just like a lead to a junior person. It could be okay. We are both colleagues in this team. Is your workload also too much? Then I'll also understand, oh, actually, you're actually doing that many other things. Maybe I can, help you do this and like step in a bit.
Exactly.
So there was a lot of things that I learned, thinking that it's a two-way thing. It's not a one-way thing.
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, exactly.
Then maybe I can ask both of you this, because I know you mentioned about building that rapport, building that relationship. Like for me, I guess when I have one-on-ones, it's more like it's professional and work related. Like we did ask how are you, but it'll be like in work related things. How do you, I don't know, maybe be closer to someone, like like for me, I share a little bit like outside work, just a little bit, hoping they'll share back.
Yeah.
Right, like maybe my blog or things that
Yeah.
I'm doing
Yeah.
like outside work, but still kind of work related. So I was thinking, what are your perspectives on this, and like what is a good cadence for one-on-ones?
Yeah, I think to start, a weekly cadence with someone that you're not familiar with works. If it's someone that you're very familiar with and you may have ad hoc, like, sometimes I have a coworker, we used to have scheduled one-on-ones, but we found that we were already like pairing on things. Like it didn't make sense to have this one-on-one on our calendar for the sake of having it, since we were more comfortable with ad hoc. So we canceled the scheduled ones, but we have our ad hoc ones. With my manager, we had weekly ones, and I found that a good cadence. Sometimes if I'm feeling too burnt out, I might request maybe a bi-weekly one-on-ones. But I always feel like for your career standpoint, you want to make sure that your manager also knows what you're up to. A lot of times people are just you just know what you've worked on the most. You're the most familiar. You are your best advocate, right? And sometimes the adversity also comes from yourself. But you want to make your manager's life easier by providing upfront. These are the things that I worked on this week. Highlight the blockers, highlight what you've solved. They like to know what you solve, right? And then highlight areas where you are looking for opportunities. Those are like top three, I feel, of things that your manager needs to know about you. I think when a manager team lead relationship is futile is when they are not clear about what you've been working on. And I've seen that happen many times, like, what? That person's working on XYZ. I didn't even know that. But you're the manager. How do you not know? Part of it is them putting in the work to find out what you're working on. They also should know that. But the other part is, in order to make it easier for them, I'm going to tell them as well and reinforce, right? The weekly cadence works because it's like you're kind of practicing, and your memory is just through consistency. You will have a better memory of what was discussed. Personally, a one-on-one doc is something that I find very important, even more so if your cadence is not weekly. So I have maybe monthly, bi-monthly one-on-ones with my skip level. So those are the times where I really lean into, okay, this is the agenda I want to talk about. And I sometimes send the document beforehand so she can prep for it too, because I never want to catch her off guard, and I do want him or her to have thought about my questions before responding to me as well. Yeah, so I'd say if it's a direct relationship like manager or peer, weekly works well personally. Bi-weekly is a stretch, that's fine. Monthly, I think I would reserve that for like the +1 kind of relationship. So like skip level, VP, if they have time, kind of thing to just check in with you. Or if you want to, really check in with like what is going on with the entire organization, then maybe you have to schedule some time with them, but it would have to be a more deliberate thing.
So I've always heard that in like workplaces, visibility is everything. And I've heard like you should, like, even on LinkedIn, you should post your achievements out there, and you should boast about what you have done, even if it's a failure. Admit it's a failure, and but talk about what you have learned, things like that. But sometimes, as an introverted person, and a lot of tech people are quite introverted, or they maybe just need a push. What tips do you have for them? And how important is this visibility thing, or is it too much to be bragging about yourself sometimes?
To believe it or not, I'm also an introvert. Like this is happening, but after this, I'm gonna go take a nap. I
A fun fact: we're actually, all three of us are introverts.
They can tell, but
I don't know if you can tell, but we are actually introverts. And after this podcast recording, we are all gonna be hermits back in our cave.
we're gonna be potatoes. Yeah, yeah. So I think I tend to think of it as I'm sharing because I want someone else to know that if it's a sharing of a failure, that it's fine to fail, and no matter what level you are at, right? And to share my learnings from that, so someone else wouldn't make the same mistake. Same thing with Stack Overflow. Someone's going to post a solution of something that you have probably come across, and that's probably why you're on Stack Overflow in the first place, or any other forums, is to try to figure out what have people tried, and not to reinvent the wheel. As software engineers, we never want to reinvent the wheel, right? And when it comes to being introvert, and like, it does feel uncomfortable to do that, right? It does feel uncomfortable. And I think I struggled with that a lot too, about talking about my own achievements. But at the same time, I noticed that if I didn't know, like, again, you're your best advocate. If you don't talk about them, nobody else is going to talk about them the way you can, and advocate for yourself the way you can, unless it's like an angel coming, and someone who's really blessed in your life and would die for you, kind of thing. It's rare, especially in a workplace, right? Like, not everyone's going to know what you've been working on, because they also have to deal with stuff on their own that's on their plate. Every time, if I do write like we have celebration posts, right? And whenever we celebrate the launch of a project or a retrospective, I try to highlight like who were involved, not just our team, but outside of our team, because they were instrumental to it as well. So I think, even though it feels uncomfortable, but if I know that one post, if I'm just going to push myself out of the comfort zone, not be a potato, and knowing that that post could reach and maybe help somebody else and highlight their achievements, I'm going to do it. It's worth it. It's worth it to me. Also, to highlight the so-called failures, right? Because you are like software engineering, the thing about that's so beautiful about it, I love, is that it's malleable. You can reverse some changes. I mean, some things are maybe less reversible than others, but at the end of the day, code is malleable, and you can try to come up with a solution, and people are always interested in knowing how you solve the problem. Or, sometimes they might be facing something that, am I the only one having issues? Am I the only one where it's not working for? Maybe somebody else is starting to report the issue, right? Instagram goes down, Instagram is down. Where do you look? Twitter, right? Or X, right? And then that, oh, okay, I somebody else. Yeah, it's not just me, and that's a nice feeling that you are going through it with someone else.
yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, just because I'm also an introvert. And when I first started my tech blog, like, the last thing I want is like to show it off, because I really feel like it's not good enough, and why would anyone want to read this? So my primary motivation for writing my blog in the first place is to share knowledge. So a lot of my readers also emailed me saying that, oh, it's because I found your blog that I was able to solve this issue, like that. And that makes me proud, because if I hadn't, if, let's say, like, I'm so secretive and I hide all this information and I make my blog private, then they'll never solve that issue. So I mean, maybe they will from other sources, not mine, but they found mine and they found it helpful, so that makes me proud. Yeah. So putting it in the team's environment as well is you elevating other people. So even for me, I would, praise other tech blogs. I found a great tech blog, I'll share that, and that would actually also help other people. So it's like about having the community mindset that it's not just about you, it's about the community that you want to share towards. And so in a way, I don't see it as bragging anymore, more like you're self-advocating and sharing knowledge. Yeah. Yeah.
100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I will just segue into a different topic for Yumin. So you are now like a very senior software, not senior as
Not that old, okay?
but like your position is a staff software engineer. So clearly your career path has been going to a position where some people would like, want to have tips on how to get there. So maybe we're looking for some career tips and advice from you. How do you make yourself stand out? We talk about like having those one-on-ones, building relationships with your team, but now when it comes to like self-assessment or like, end of year reviews, how do you make sure that your manager recognize your efforts and like, some tips that you can maybe give on that?
Yeah, I think part of it, the most fundamental step is acknowledging where you're at and acknowledging what you're good at and what your limitations are. Then from there, you kind of like work it out with your manager to see like, are there any opportunities that align where I can lean into my strengths? So back in the day before my promotion to staff, one of the things that I noticed was, we had this so-called first responder rotation whereby you, for 1 week at a time, a member would be in charge of like support tickets and responding to those while others focus on like features and building their products. So the task of the first responder is really to triage, right? The bugs that come in, what's most important, what's first priority, what's not so important, we can probably put in a backlog. And while our team was expanding from 8 to now 30 plus, the processes that worked in the past no longer work for the team of 32. And so I started to look into, now we have so many services that our team is supposedly in charge of. And for a first responder to have knowledge across all of these services was just not sustainable. So we had to split up the rotation into 3 now. Like, okay, these services go in here, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The rotation is also 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But now we have different ways of tracking, right? So I had to, identify the problem, figure out, okay, what was the thing that's not working for us anymore, and come up with solutions or proposals, at least to my manager at that time, who was director, and then also talk to my peers, like put out a survey, what's working for you, what's not, what is the part about like first responder that, is really painful for you. And I try to figure out, okay, how do we address the pain points? When you start to think about pain points that others are going through, versus like, I understand that we have to ship things, we have to get stuff out of the door, but how can I also make it more enjoyable for my teammates? That's where I think you can stand out. But you have to make the case for that. And I think, when you come to it with a more holistic picture of your team, that's how you stand out. I think the individual contributor role, for sure, like, when you're first getting into the company or the domain, of course, you need time to ramp up, to get familiar. But from familiarity is where you can see where the inefficiencies are. And that's where you can leverage those inefficiencies that you're spotting and bring a solution or proposal to solve that problem, because no manager likes having problems thrown at them. They like to hear a problem and hear a solution for them. So that's where you need to bring that to the table. And that's something I learned from my dad. He's always like, you have to think ahead of your manager. They might ask you for X, but you have to give them X, Y, Z. Or give them alternatives to consider, because it's easy to just say, okay, I solved the problem. But what I want you to do is not just solve the problem, but foresee other problems that might come up, and then have those solutions for those problems. You have to be a step ahead as well. And sometimes we joke about this, you're playing 3D chess almost. And it's true in the real world that's how you're going to stand out. You're not just solving the problem that immediately at hand. You're looking forward, and you're taking 2 steps, forward for the team, for your manager. And sometimes it is a political thing that you have to do. You have to know, like, by doing this, how much social capital am I going to gain? politically for my manager, for my team as well. So that's how I would, it might sound a little more, what's that word, like ulterior motive, but if the ulterior motive also encompasses elevating the team, then it's worth the to do it.
I would say that's a very valuable take on that. Yeah. I was wondering maybe if Saloni, since you're also like a senior software engineer, if do you have anything to add on to that?
No, actually not on that. But I did have a question like before we like end the session. I actually want to know like, do you have tips for feedbacks? Like, at least in the teams I've been in, we have a regular habit of giving feedback to every single other teammate,
Like peer reviews.
peer reviews.
Yeah.
And I personally have a very hard time to come up with criticism. I think that's the word. Constructive feedback
Yeah.
for people. Because I don't know if it's just me. I just see the good in people, maybe. But it's very hard for me to like, where was this person lacking? What can I think of? But and a lot of times, even if I come up with something, I feel it's just my opinion. Like maybe does that person doesn't need to change that, doesn't need to improve it. I just because I feel it. So I find it really hard to come up with that. Do you have any tips
I
for?
also have very difficult, especially if you're working with some of the most brilliant people you've worked with. It's very hard to find something negative, right? But sometimes I do feel like maybe I don't view it as a negative, but hey, they're doing an amazing job. How can we further, maybe they can do more knowledge sharing with what's working for them? How did they get to this point? And then that's something that I think is my most like critical feedback is, you're great, but how do we replicate what you're doing? And how do you ensure maybe you can do it through mentorship or through guiding other people and kind of spread that knowledge, right? Because sometimes they're really really good but may not know how to multiply that effect in a way that other team members can also follow. Like that's something actually I have to work on as well, is that okay, I'm good at breaking down a really huge task into very small chunks that are organized in certain ways that other people can like pick off and parallelize and digest it, right? But if you're really struggling, then you can just say in the peer feedback, like, I'm really stretching it, but this is what I can think of that you can, further your impact on, or the way you can further impact on. Now, constructive feedback is also difficult because of the reason if you do have a coworker that's very difficult to work with, then you never want to yuck their yum, but you also want to know that I need to give this feedback because it's affecting the team. So there's this framework called the nonviolent communication, and I have to, refresh my memory, but I do remember it being something about like, having very specific moments that you can share with them, how those moments made you feel, how you would have liked it to, for that person to maybe do it differently, and, come up with a solution with them. And I think, when you come from it from a very empathetic point of view and knowing if they can feel that you're coming at this with good intentions and you want to help them work through it, then they will be able to kind of take that feedback more in a manner that is more productive. And sometimes, you also have to understand how people like taking feedback. Some people like it like direct. I hate when people beat around the bush. Some people needs a little bit softer lending. And, we have this thing at work called human user guides where you can provide like, okay, this is how I like to receive feedback, how I like to receive celebration. Some people don't like to be celebrated like publicly. They would rather you tell them in person or something like, or like in a DM. So human user guides are actually pretty good. I think if your team is willing or wants to do it, it's a good way to just lay the like expectations with people, because you're working together, right, day to day. At the end of the day, you want to cut the tension, and but it has to be done. And I will say I've given my fair share of constructive feedback, and I was sometimes like I press submit and I'm like, oh my god, please, I hope they don't view it as anything personal. It is personal, right, because it is a peer feedback, but I hope they view it as something that we can work together on. And sometimes I just follow up with them in a DM like, hey, before I submit this thing, I want to just discuss this with you, and make sure that you're comfortable with this and see where I'm coming from. And before you hit the submit button could be a good thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's something I also like try to do. Like before before I write any constructive feedback in the proper documentation, I would have a one-on-one with them, let them know in person that this is what I feel you can improve on. If they ask for feedback, usually that's when I'll tell them, so that they're not surprised by what's gonna come.
Yeah.
If not, that could be taken as a very negative thing. Like, oh wait, all this while you were like so chipper with me, and then you're saying this. So I try to like give them pre-warning.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I have very constructive feedbacks usually, but I give them like a pre-warning, like, and I appreciate if they can do the same with me as well, so that it's not a surprise. Like it's like, okay, good that you told me actually mid-quarter, so like by the end of quarter, I'm actually already improved in that aspect, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a very key thing to bring up, because when I do see something that, you have to nip it in the bud. Like when it's happening and you feel uncomfortable with that situation, you just have to tell them there and then, and it's sometimes I give it another time before I tell them, because maybe I just did it the first time was by mistake. But if the second time they're doing it, then and it's consistent, then I will tell them in a DM, like, hey, I noticed XYZ and it really made me feel this way, and I think that we could probably come up, like, do you think you can help me come up with a way to land it better, maybe, or something like that. And times when I've done that, it was productive, because they didn't even realize what they were, they were doing was making someone feel uncomfortable, and they were actually thankful that someone had highlighted it to them. And I think nobody's perfect. We are all on a learning journey. There's some things that I do, I'm sure people like have issues with or something. And if they give me feedback like, hey, do you think I do it this way instead? I'm going to take that feedback and I'm going to improve, because I want to be a person that people want to work with. And I want to make sure that our team doesn't have any tension, that you want all of that to be established, so that you can focus on the actual business logic or the actual problems that are coming up, right? But I will say this again and again, the most difficult problems to solve are the ones involving humans. Any software problem always boils down to a human problem, I feel. Yeah.
It's true. Definitely, I think a hug is more, specific, deliberate, and would be more clear. So that's something that maybe people who watch this episode can suggest to their team, like, to do, right? Maybe we'll even link a template of a hug. Like, you can find a lot of template online, like, in this episode. So thanks so much. I think it's such a valuable episode. Once again, I think Yumin always have so much to share about this, and we are really grateful that you come all this way to record.
I'm happy to do it. Yeah, happy to do it. I mean, this is time for myself as well, away from the boys at home. So yeah, happy to do it.
So I think this is a good time for wrapping up. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe to us for future episodes. And do let us know in the comments if there's any questions you have for Yumin. She's definitely someone that we find very approachable, and someone who has really experienced a lot of things, and she's willing to share that. So we'll also link Yumin's socials in the episode.
And also, before we leave, all of like the things that we've discussed here are based on our own experiences and our own situations. It is not the rules of life or anything. So do use where applicable. And so yeah, just want to remind that. And with that, we are Ragtag, and see you in the next episode.
Bye. See you.